I started Husband Help Haven 15 years ago, back in 2011. Started writing about my thoughts on marriage, on saving your marriage, on how to be a good husband. That's what this site started as. It was just a side project for me. Well, in the 15 years that I've spent helping men through separation and crisis and eventually becoming a professional coach and helping men in that way, has my mind changed about anything? Do I see marriage differently now than I did 15 years ago? Well, as it turns out, yes, and actually on some pretty important ways, and that's going to be what we talk about in today's episode. I'm actually going to walk through 5 shifts in how I see marriage and separation and the best way to navigate through those things as a man trying to save your marriage. And why are we talking about this? Well, 2 reasons. First off, this is the Husband Help podcast. It's where you're going to learn how to be the best husband, father, and man that you can be no matter what your marriage is like right now. But the other reason is this is the end cap on a pretty substantially long series, both on the calendar and in terms of how many episodes we've done on this, going through the lessons that I've learned in the past 10 plus years of coaching men through separation. And so what we're going to do today is just walk through 5 of the ways that my mind has sharpened or shifted on some pretty important topics. And we're going to start with the very first one right off the bat is people are, on the whole, less malicious but more blinded than I thought when I came into Husband Help Haven. Now, I always have tried to approach these situations with a great deal of charity, and I've always prided myself on really holding your wife in charity and in humanity and sort of viewing her as a person who's hurting. But I think what I underestimated is just how much support there is out there for bad narratives, really on both sides, and how easy it is to buy into a story that you tell yourself that's not quite true, but somebody else out there is telling you that it is. So when it comes to her side, I know that the vast, vast majority of wives really have more of a reason to leave than just, I don't want to be married anymore. There is real hurt. There are real reasons. There are real things that she's trying to get that feel fair, that feel like she shouldn't have to live without these things, whether that's just like peace and happiness or whether it's something more like a midlife crisis. One way or another, there are these real reasons that she's experienced that have driven her to this point. And although there may be some stubbornness, some sort of misinterpreted hurt, maybe some escapism, maybe some of that stuff in there. Um, the truth is that she got here because she's hurting, not because she's evil, not because she's dumb, not because she's just been tricked. At the core of it, she is a hurting person trying to make her life better. And what you see from her during separation is the evidence of that reality. Okay, so all the stories out there that say, marriage is just a flawed institution, or like she's just cold and calculating, or like you're just playing catch up because she's a sociopath and she's been planning this for like 5 years and like you just didn't know it. All that stuff. I mean, there's so many stories like that out there, basically incentivizing you to just give up and move on because you married a dud anyways. And like, that's not true. That's not true. But on the flip side, you've experienced some of these false narratives from your wife as well. You're not a terrible husband. The vast majority of you didn't have these like major issues in your marriage. You weren't abusive. You didn't cheat. But the reality is that I think a lot of wives get to this point where they feel neglect that outpaces your failure or your actual negligence towards the marriage and towards the family. And the reality is, contrary to some of the stories that she might be believing right now, you're not a terrible husband. You're not a slacker. You're not you're not an abuser. You're not a narcissist. I mean, the number of husbands who actually fit those labels compared to who are told they are those labels, I think there's a pretty big gap between that number. So again, I'm not trying to dismiss that there are some guys that really do need some help out there. Okay, I'm not just in the same way there are some wives out there who really need some help. But the point is, this death by 1,000 cuts, I mean, we even had a whole episode talking about like how do good couples get divorced. That is the story so much of the time. And that story gets framed on both sides as if it's the other person's fault. She should just be more committed. He should just be more attentive. when really it's just that life is really hard and complicated, and like you start adding in stuff like financial difficulties or parenting difficulties or other circumstances that just happen as you get older. Your parents pass away. You sort of go through these different shifts in your environment. You might move, right? These things are going to come with some discontent that just comes from transition. And sometimes you're going to be misaligned on what you judge as important, or the sort of bridge of communication has broken down. Or let's be honest, you and your wife both have slackened in your proactivity towards each other, your protection of love for each other. And really, I think a good example of this is there's an article that went viral many years ago but still goes around today, and it's called "My Wife Divorced Me for Leaving Dishes by the Sink." And again, I'm not going to go through that whole article. Maybe at some point I'll go through this a little bit more, but like, the guy makes this fair point that if, me not moving my dishes from by the sink into the dishwasher to my wife was rightly experienced as neglect, and in some ways like an indication of how much I care about her. If I can't make this tiny little bit of effort, I must care about her even less than that. And on some degree, I like this story because it encapsulates both sides of the lived experience that so many couples go through before they get to separation. And so, like, I agree with the concept of you should care about the things that your wife cares about, and if you don't do that long enough and insistently enough, okay, that's kind of that's going to cause some big problems. But at the same time, when push comes to shove, we can all just agree you shouldn't get divorced for dishes by the sink. If your commitment can't cover dishes by the sink, I'm sorry, you have made a false commitment then when you entered your marriage. Because for better or for worse should certainly cover dishes by the sink. And additionally, your wife didn't have to believe the story that she told herself about what those dishes by the sink mean about your care for her. She could have looked at different things as proof of your love for her rather than the thing that you're not doing that she thinks you should be able to do. And again, we'll talk more about that maybe another time. But this is just a good sort of as analogy for the industry as a whole, where it's very easy for the men to be framed as like obnoxiously negligent, or like, how could you have your head in the sand for this long? And then on the flip side, the wives are framed as, how could she be this cold and cruel and flippant about her commitments to the marriage? And again, I just think that those characterizations don't actually help and do end up justifying your own narratives more than I thought. Now, guys, I just want a quick aside. If you want the cheat sheet for this episode, you don't want to listen to the whole thing, or you would just want a reference that you can look back on instead of re-listening to this when you're done with it, go to husbandhelphaven.com/episode-37. That's episode 37 with a little hyphen between the numbers 37. And what you're going to find there is a no email required downloadable PDF that is literally just a cheat sheet for this episode. So feel free to reference that if you wish. I just want to throw that out there before we get too far into the episode. Now, what I said, okay, there's a lot of bad information out there. Here's another thing that I've realized that sort of takes us into, there is a source of good information out there that I've come to really, really like and appreciate. And that is that I believe attachment theory has perhaps the best, the most, the easiest to access explanatory power over both how relationships break down and what makes relationships work well. So attachment theory has really become my preferred framework for talking through how a husband and a wife interact with each other and even see each other or experience each other in relationship. Now, again, certainly we are not going to go all the way into attachment theory, a deep dive on that in this episode, but I just want to flag that as something that I've really noticed and that I hope to and plan to develop more content on in the future, more episodes about, or even maybe some articles or standalone videos. Because I really do feel that this is just such a great framework. What attachment theory does really well is it helps you both assess where things are at and give you more directionality into what fixing your stuff looks like and how you can expect those fixes to land alongside your wife if she's not fixing her stuff yet. Okay. So again, you don't really need the deep science. There's plenty of other people out there. I'll just say it right now instead of giving you the whole, like, I'm comfortable just telling you, go YouTube, go look up attachment theory in adult relationships. I think that the principles you're going to learn from that, just doing that research, are very, very helpful. So I would just encourage you towards that. I think attachment has so much explanatory power and makes so much sense of what often happens, how relationships break down, and how they get built back up. And so, if you are in therapy, if you're seeing a therapist, talk to them about attachment theory. Ask them how you can learn more about this and how you can become more secure. How can I earn secure for myself? How can I respond to my wife's uh, dysfunctional ways of dealing with her own insecurity? How can I do that? Okay. So I think that this is a very good way. Like, this is the best. Here's what's happening under the hood explanation for how relationships function. Okay. I won't go much deeper than that in this one. Now, with that, I think that also, again, nicely segues into another sort of refinement that I've had over the years is that, when I started Husband Help Haven, and I'm trying to articulate what it is that men and women do differently in marriage, because this is a deeply held conviction, is that men and women just are different. They, masculine and feminine love differently, and they experience love differently. And so I've tried to speak into that dynamic and that distinction ever since the start of Husband Help Haven, to varying degrees of success with varying degrees of clarity. And early on, the sort of keystone principle that I hammered home a lot was attraction. Now, just to sort of give my past self a little bit of extra credit here, I never framed attraction as a physical thing, or certainly not a sexual thing, but more of a deeper emotional longing for connection. Ah, hold on to that word. We'll come back to that. It's that longing, it's that desire, it's that thing that makes you want to choose something. I want that thing, so I'm going to choose it. And so, again, this makes good sense, because if we want, like, your wife isn't going to do what she doesn't want to do. If she doesn't want to be in the marriage, she's not going to be in the marriage. Give her enough time, give that desire enough time to cement itself or to maintain itself. It's just not going to happen. Okay. On the flip side, if she wants to be in the marriage, she will be in the marriage, even if things are hard, right? She will be. So again, it makes sense to sort of press towards that. And I still think that's eventually what we're trying to work towards. We need her to want to come back, which is something that's somewhat outside of your control, but that's why we're trying to foster an environment where that can happen, or foster a relationship that can happen. Now, again, I realize, though, all right, attraction is a bit further downstream maybe than I thought. And so the next keystone principle that I really hit on was trust. And I still really like my trust formula: trustworthy behavior plus consistency plus time equals opportunity for trust to regrow. The sort of reasoning for this as my keystone keystone principle was, listen, if your wife doesn't trust you, if she doesn't feel safe with you, she can't let herself want you. Anytime she feels any of that desire, she's going to shut it down because it feels unsafe. There's too many alarm bells that are still going off. In other words, like, you have to have trust before you can even get your foot in the door. So that has to be the thing that we start with. Okay. And I still think that's true. Trust is still the thing that you have to start with. We need to reestablish trust. But I do think now, and this is where the sort of the full picture I think has sort of come together for me, is we have trust as the starting point. We have desire as the ending point, but it is connection that builds the bridge. And so now these days, so much of the time when I'm doing coaching, working directly with a client, I find myself both asking myself and pressing him on, where can we still connect? If we still need to rebuild trust, okay, we're going to focus on doing that so that we can then move towards, where is the connection still available? Where can we create meaningful connection? Where can we create rewarding connection? So again, I really like, I think that this is a nice refinement, a nice clarification that sort of puts the whole flow chart together. We start with trust, we work through connection, and we arrive at desire or attraction, or whatever word you want to look there. Now, alongside this, there is another piece of beliefs. And I think that through our connection, we're trying to rebuild positive beliefs about the relationship. But we won't get into all that. For now, we will just leave that there. I think that connection is a piece that's relatively new on the scene in how I think about relationships, or newly formalized as a player on the scene of just sort of the big picture of how relationships rebuild. But I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's a good thing to stay focused on. Now, all of that brings me to, okay, that number 4 on my list here of ways that my understanding has refined or shifted over the years is that navigating separation has fewer forks in the flowchart than I thought. And I really think that, like, if I just had to pick one phrase, 4 words could pretty well sum up how I approach separation for 99% of the guys that come through Husband Help Haven. And those words are love well, keep going. Love well, keep going. I think that these words are sufficient to explain what your job as a man trying to save your marriage all by yourself is. Love well, keep going. Notice that those are things that are totally within your control. Now, of course, there is circumstantial application, and I understand that's kind of where the flowchart comes in. But I, for a long time, sort of had this idea of like, well, if she's doing this, then you need to do this. If this is if this is the motive for separation, your journey through reconciliation is going to look this different way. And there is still some of that, but really what I've realized is that a lot of that is just turning 2 dials, really, which sit beneath love well, keep going. And those 2 dials are proactivity and protection. How much are you leaning in versus, for the sake of, with vulnerability versus how much are you sort of insulating, protecting yourself? But both of those are done in the interest of love well, keep going. Okay. So again, it's narrowed down. It's simpler than maybe I thought it was, maybe the industry thought it was. Either way, I think that I'm much clearer on this. And, when in doubt, I tell this to my clients all the time. When in doubt, ask yourself one simple question. Am I still married? Am I still her husband? Do I still bear the label husband? Okay, therefore, I will live out my commitment. This is how I attain peace of mind. This is how I live out the man that I want to be. This is how I also give my marriage the best chance that I can. So I'm going to, with that commitment in mind, with that resolve in mind, my resolve is love well, keep going. Now, again, loving well can have varying degrees of proactivity attached to it. Keep going might have different amounts of protection incorporated into it. It might be that for you, love well, keep going really just boils down to I am not going to let myself take on a sour grapes mentality about my marriage. I am not going to let myself think, oh, she doesn't want me. Fine. Don't care about that. Don't want her anyways. I'm just moving on. But this marriage wasn't salvageable anyway. So I guess we're just done then. Okay. I don't want you to have that mindset. So the bare minimum would be if she leans back in, I want to have open arms to her. I want to be willing to entertain reconnection if she leans back in. And I'm going to treat her with gentleness and I'm going to try to avoid combativeness and animosity such that leaning in is as easy a thing for her to do as it can be. At least that the barriers aren't on my end. Okay. It's not that I've done things that have made it harder or punishing or have, communicated to her that she can't lean into me. I'm going to try to keep my arms open, going to try to keep myself in this posture of welcomingness towards her. That might be the full extent for you of love well, keep going. Or it might just be, I'm not going to let myself sort of close the door mentally on this relationship as long as I remain her husband. So you sort of get the picture here. There's different ways that this can play out man to man, but the underlying command or advice, since I'm not really in a position to give you commands, the underlying advice is love well, keep going. Now, one of the other sort of simplified things on the flowchart, one of the things that I've really become convinced of is that no man is prepared to do separation alone. You might be the only one fighting for your marriage between you and your wife, but you should not be doing that alone. That's why so often I encourage guys, look, reach out to those friends, reach out to that sort of cousin or whoever that you used to be close with so that you can lean on them and just have somebody to talk to. If nothing else, get in with a therapist, get in with a talk counselor, someone where you can just go and let this stuff out with another human being that you are actually dialoguing back and forth with. Now, I think that is extremely important and one of the single most helpful ways of supporting yourself as you go through something like this. That's also my conviction around that is why, and the difficulty that men have had finding that, because it sounds so simple, just reach out to your friends or whatever, but some guys just don't have that. Or those relationships they try to reach out to those people, but they don't end up giving them the sort of help that they want or need right now. That is why I created Husband Help Group last year. I really became certain that this is a need that men coming through Husband Help Haven have, is community and camaraderie as we are fighting for your marriage. And so if that's interesting to you, if you would like to look at that, if you don't have that in your life and you would like that in your life right now and it's not available around you, come check out Husband Help Group, even just a month or two. You might be amazed at what a difference it makes in just your outlook and your overall groundedness as you're fighting for your marriage. You can go get a little bit more information about that if you're interested. husbandhelphaven.com/group. Whether you join our support group or go lean on your own friends, do what works best for you. But please hear me that that is a very important thing, and that is something I guess I could really even put that in as its own standalone point because I am a lone wolf myself by nature. I mean, I'm a solopreneur, right? I run this thing by myself. Some of that is because that's just my personality profile. And so I have had to learn this in my own life as well that like I can't face the hard stuff alone. It is a trap to think that you can. And I have had to learn that the hard way in some areas of my life where just people aren't meant to carry mass amounts of stress on their own. They just aren't. And so please find somebody to share this road with. Okay. Now, carrying forward to wrap out this sort of fifth and final shift in how I see marriage and relationships. And this is a nice culmination because, right, we started with people are less malicious but more blinded than I thought. So the information that you're getting is more wrong and there's more of it than I first thought. And I already came in pretty skeptical of the marriage industry. And to be fair, let me just say on that point, I've also been amazed because there are actually more good sources of information than there were when I started as well. So at the start, there was sort of less of everything. And in fact, there just wasn't much out there for men going through separation. Now there's more of both the good and the bad. So I will say that as well. The marriage industry is not it's not all bad. I don't want to be too hard on that to my peers in this space. Um, but it makes sense. Okay, there's bad information. Okay, we're sort of narrowing into, well, attachment is good information. And with attachment, we're going to work on connection. And with that connection, our job is to really just keep pursuing that connection as you go through separation. Like it's really not much more complicated than that. All of that brings us to communication is further downstream than I thought because it's more emotional than I thought. And so it's more important than I thought. Do you see how that works? If you don't have, and this is why I put this in the order that I did, because I think in some ways, without attachment theory in the picture somewhere, and it doesn't have to be attachment theory, but if without that self-awareness that I think attachment theory does a good job of illuminating for you, but however you get there, if you don't know your own insecurities and you don't know your wife's insecurities, communication is futile. I mean, really and truly, you will talk in circles. The best you can hope for if you don't understand the emotional channel that communication speaks into, the best you can hope for is getting really good at articulating why you're right and why she's wrong, or why your position is the right one and she should come to your position, or why her position is the wrong one and why she should leave her position. And the same is true for her. Without understanding her own insecurities, without that introspection, without that sympathy for your insecurities, she will only hear hurt from you, especially once we get to this point. Your words will only land in that hurtful place for her. Again, that is because there is more of an emotional component that has to be pierced through before the actual information in communication can really be fully assessed, or maybe alongside the information. We have to process that. And so again, I think that so much of the time guys have this idea of like, oh, if I just press on long enough, there's going to come this day where my wife and I are going to finally have a conversation that just changes everything. I'm like, no, that's not how it's going to work. And this goes back to I wrote an article on Husband Help Haven early on in the life of the site that is titled basically "Good Communication Won't Save Your Marriage." And the point in that article is exactly as I've said here. It's like if you just focus in on communication, I think this is what people get wrong in counseling a lot of times too. Is like you go into counseling and the very first thing you do as soon as you sit down with the counselor, session number one is, so what's going on? What's the problems? and you bring these problems out, and the counselor might even help you talk about those problems better than you've ever talked about them before. But because we've skipped the emotional awareness and empathy piece, all we actually end up doing is making things worse. We get better at saying the things that our partner disagrees with. Like we're pulling the gap even wider in some ways when we do that. And so I still think there's some truth to that. And yet on the flip side, why it's more important than I thought is I've seen secondhand and firsthand what transformation can happen once you get those other dominoes in order. Oh man, once we have that self awareness down and we have that empathy down and we have worked through our insecurities, there is so much power to be had, so much healing and restoration to be had. You can gain more sympathy for each other through good communication, through having these good conversations when you really learn how to express yourself and hear your partner. And so again, that sort of sums up the whole point, right? It's further downstream, more emotional, and more important than I thought. So those are the things that I've really would say my mind has sort of overall, if I tried to articulate how my sort of view of marriage and healing a marriage has shifted, I think those five shifts would pretty well sum it up. And you can hear how it's not so much that I've radically changed my mind. It's not like I thought A and now I think B. It's more like I thought A, but now I sort of have shifted the pieces. I've sort of lined everything up to where it all flows together, maybe just a little bit more nicely. So maybe a refinement is a better word. But one way or another, one area where I really have sort of changed my mind or sort of had new information that I've gained over the years is going to be what we talk about next time. But this won't be part of the series, but it's been an episode that I've been kicking the can down the road for a while on, and that is the boundaries episode. For several episodes now, I've said, guys, we're going to have an episode about boundaries. So I can finally because I think I have a really good framework for understanding boundaries. And I do. And I'm very confident in it. And I've used it with clients and I've used it on Q&A calls and I've used it in my own life and I've given it to friends and consistently what I've heard back is, wow, this makes sense of boundaries in a way that sort of makes boundaries click in a way they hadn't before for me. So that's going to be what we talk about next episode. I hope to see you there, but I also hope that you got something out of listening to this episode. Remember, if you want the cheat sheet, you want to go back and reference something that we talked about, husbandhelphaven.com/episode 37. That's episode -37 is going to be where you want to go. Either way, thank you so much for listening, guys. Pleasure to be speaking with you today. Thank you for the opportunity to speak into your life in any small way. I don't take it lightly. I really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you for being here. Much manly love. It's been Steve, and we'll see you on the next episode.